is, the town of Edenton would like to express its deepest level of appreciation to State House Representative Ed Goodwin for all of his years of service to the state, the First District of North Carolina, Chowan County, and the town of Edenton. And tonight it is our honor to present Representative Goodwin with this proclamation. Ed, if you will step forward, please.
This is under false pretense. I wasn't told this. I was told to come and answer some questions. So I won't call his name, but he lied to me.
Well, we can do it anyway.
But I'm gonna look at him.
Wonder who that is.
I can get him later.
And this is a proclamation honoring North Carolina House of Representative Ed Goodwin. And whereas the North Carolina Representative Ed Goodwin has not only proudly served North Carolina's District 1 over the past 4 years, but has served previously in the United States Air Force as a federal law enforcement officer and as a Chowan County Commissioner. And whereas Representative Ed Goodwin has been a voice for all his constituents in District 1, and Representative Goodwin has courageously fought for northeastern North Carolina and has been a supporter for progress and prosperity for all residents in District 1. And whereas Representative Goodwin has been critical in the success of creating opportunities for residents of the town of Edenton and Chowan County, and Representative Goodwin has helped to make the town of Edenton a truly special place to visit and call home. And whereas Representative Goodwin's service to the town of Edenton cannot be measured by any normal standard, but can be felt throughout the community and seen by all the people who reside in and visit the South's prettiest small town. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Jimmy Stallings, Mayor of Edenton, along with the members of the Edenton Town Council, do hereby express our deepest appreciation for Representative Goodwin and his commitment to the town of Edenton, and his efforts will remain deeply rooted in the history of Edenton. And be it further resolved that the Mayor and Town Council urge all citizens of Edenton to give thanks to Representative Goodwin for his efforts and loyal service to our town of Edenton. Yeah.
That's mighty nice. No, you did that. Chasing me around. I'm coming to get you.
I know. I appreciate it.
And Jimmy, I want to say to Eddie that we are just, we would not have Katie's church money without him. We tried for almost 20 years to raise the money, and this man went to Raleigh and brought it home for us, and I think it's something that the town of Edenton will never forget, and we are in your debt. When you told me, I started crying.
He did, and I kept talking. I love to see him cry. And he cries so easy. I don't know what his wife does with him.
Well, this year bring us up. We got some more problems.
So this is all. I can go home now.
Now you can go home. And you can feel free to stay if you want.
I might stay, hear y'all argue a little bit. I want to see how Mr. Barnes does.
Come on, Eddie.
Thank you. Okay, the next thing is our boards and commissions and committee appointments. The following 3 applicants are seeking appointment to various town and Edenton boards. They are as follows: Rick McCarroll for the tree committee, Ellen Kolodny for the tree committee, and Earl Willis for the planning board. And we would like to welcome these applicants and ask each of them to come one by one to the podium to share a little bit about themselves. So, Mr. McCarroll, you will be first.
Thank you very much for allowing me to come before you. My wife and I are recent arrivals to the, can you? My wife and I are recent arrivals to the lovely town of Edenton. We arrived last November, and right from the start I've wanted to become involved with the town and contribute. When I found out that there was an opening, I expressed an opinion and a desire to come and provide some assistance in whatever way, shape, or form that I can. My wife and I live at 308 South Oakham on the corner of King. It's a house that needs quite a bit of work, and we're happily doing that. I am the steward of a very large and very old pecan tree that with the help of North Carolina Forestry, they helped me determine a way to preserve its life for another 25 or 30 years, so I hope I can do that. I'm a civilian employee, I'm a port engineer for the US Navy, so I 2 days a week I go up to the naval base in Norfolk. Prior to that, I owned a shipping company with 2 partners out in California. We ran 27 deep draft ships, tankers, and container ships, and roll-on, roll-off ships, both commercial and for the Military Sealift Command. Before that, I served 20 years in the Coast Guard. And we love town. We've made it a point to meet as many of our neighbors and socialize, and again become part of the community and give back.
Well, thank you for becoming part of the community, and thank you for volunteering your time.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Can I answer any questions anybody might have?
I just got a comment. You're working mighty hard on your house, and it looks great. And we're just really thankful you're here. You're participating in the community, and you're becoming part of this place, and that means a lot to all of us. And I'm glad you've.
It is our pleasure. When we came out house hunting a year ago in September, I had not heard of Edenton, and we wanted to buy an old house, and looked at a number of different websites, and we saw a number of houses pop up on Edenton. So we got to take a look at this place. So we stayed up at Captain's Quarters, and we drove probably an 80-mile radius, looking around, and I said, "Why are we going anywhere else?" Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Ellen Kolodny. I've been here since 1996 with my late husband. I'm a retired physician, and I now own Wetland Plants, Inc. We provide native wetland plants that are used for stormwater management, shoreline erosion control, etc. We're pretty much the provider for the Southeast at this point. And I'm happy to learn about what urban forestry is about and see if there's any way I can contribute.
I have a hard time thinking you're going to learn about it. I think you're going to teach the
I think there's a lot I can learn. But for those of you who haven't heard, several years ago you bravely decided that we would have bees in town, or would be allowed to have bees in town, and that's the result. So I brought you some of their efforts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We don't get many people that are as qualified for a committee as you are for this.
Good evening, Earl Willis. I'm a retired school teacher. My entire career was in Reappointments County. I have lived in Edenton for going on 37 years. And like these other 2 people, when you're working full-time, it's difficult to give back to the community. And since I have been retired, that is something that I have made an effort to do, is try to give back to the town of Edenton. I've served on the Edenton Historic Preservation Commission for 9 years and involved in the Lions Club and several other things. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer.
Thank you for serving on the planning board. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Earl, thank you for just your steady guidance in everything you do. So
Well, thank you.
You're always,
You're very kind.
you're always on point and give us good advice when we need it. And we just.
I need to get you talking Gloria.
Okay, and then we have 2 reappointments for the Edenton Tree Committee, and each of these applicants are eligible for reappointment, and both applicants have requested reappointment, and that is John Moorhead on the Tree Committee and April Lane on the Tree Committee, and I don't believe either one.
Both have served many, many years.
Yes. Okay, so, Okay, does anybody have any questions of any of the applicants that are here? If not, I will entertain a motion to reappoint, the two for the tree committee and appoint the new ones that you have already heard from.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I just want to say, this is a great group of candidates.
Yeah.
I'm excited about it.
I want to say thank you to Dwayne too for pulling all this together, Dwayne. It looks like all the boards and commissions are pretty well filled now.
We have
Close to
one
it.
Board of Adjustment alternate vacancy and one planning board vacancy. That's actually filled right now, but it's an expired term, so we're waiting for another applicant to be able to kind of slide in there, and then we'll be set.
That's great.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. You're on board.
Welcome to the team.
Yes. Okay, now our next presentation is from, Christina Whitfield, and she's here tonight to present the plan on biking. So Christina, I'll turn the podium over to you.
So first I want to just start and say thank you guys for letting me come out to visit with you tonight. It's been a long time since I've been back. For those of you who have been following along, our plan went to DOT for review back in February, and with a lot of the short staffing, it took a little bit of time for them to turn it around and give us the green light to endorse it. So just been eager to get back here, and turned out to be a pretty good day to sit out there and review my presentation to gear up for this. So for those of you who recall, a couple of years ago, the town applied to NCDOT to work on putting together a bicycle and pedestrian project acceleration plan. So that's really just a fancy way of saying there's been a lot of planning done for Edenton, but never really led by Edenton. It's been by the Albemarle Rural Planning Organization or by Trowan County. And this plan was really to bring that in and vet it here locally with the community and figure out what those priorities might be that you all would pursue funding for in the future. And that's how this plan kind of got its auspices. So we didn't do a lot of new creation because so much had been done. We really just threw that out there to the public, and we're trying to get an understanding of if that's something that they really liked or they hated, or if they wanted to tweak it a little bit. And that's exactly what we did through this process. So if you want to go ahead to the next slide. So we won't spend too much time on this, but today we're going to talk a little bit about the planning process itself. We're going to talk about the verification of those recommendations that I mentioned. And then we're going to review some of the public survey feedback that we received in our day over at the farmers market. And then we'll go into the priority projects and what this means for action plan and funding a little later on. So with our plan development process, like I said, we had a lot of good plans that came before us, so there was no reason to just completely throw out the book and start from scratch. So we really did a thorough review of all of those and pulled them forward as our starting point. And that's where we developed our vision and started to understand what the community's needs were. As council members, I'm sure you all have heard a lot of what those are. We heard the typical culprits like Broad Street at Virginia. And there's just, things that you would hear every time you talk to somebody that just kept coming up. And those were identified in these previous plans. It's just that they kind of lost momentum and had nowhere to go. So we took those recommendations, further verified them, and actually ran them through a robust prioritization process that actually matches what the state does, so that we could ensure that the projects that we want to choose and put forward are competitive at the statewide level as you're competing for funding with everyone else across the state for bicycle and pedestrian projects. And then finally, we documented it in a way that was hopefully pretty clear and concise that you guys could get behind, really sink your teeth into, and use it as a communication tool. So just a brief snapshot of our existing conditions. Due to the historic nature of Edenton, you all have a really great solid grid network. That grid network has pretty good sidewalks for the most of it in the core of town. And what that grid network does for us is even though we don't have physical bike lanes anywhere, it makes it a really comfortable place for most people to be able to get out and about. So just a quick snapshot as our starting point. If you don't mind. So what we did with those recommendations from kind of the overview of everything, we put it together and we put it out there to the public and wanted them to tell us what they wanted, essentially. We gave them every recommendation, said choose your top 10, rank them, tell us exactly how you would do it if you had unlimited resources. We also asked them, so as we got into the prioritization of the projects, there was a couple of categories that DOT requires when they vet projects for funding eligibility. So we put those concepts out to the public and said, of these criteria, what's most important to you and really let them drive how we weighted that prioritization moving on. With our survey, we also coupled that with a day at the farmer's market. So back when Elizabeth was here, we set up for an entire day out there with a table. We had some pretty heavy torrential downpours of rain and wind, but we still had a really good turnout. And we really just used this as a way to push our survey. So we had flyers with QR codes that we went around town handing out as people were walking, putting them up in storefronts if they would allow it, and then just trying to hand them out to people at the farmer's market as well. And if you want to go ahead. That actually resulted in over 70 people taking our survey, which is really good for a town the size of Edenton. I've worked in much larger communities. I'll pick on Rocky Mount, where we struggle to get 50 people to take our surveys, and you guys have a lot of people who are really invested in what's happening here, and that helped a lot. With those survey questions, we were able to gather a little over 300 individual data points through the various questions we were asking, and there were over 115 comments written in about the plan's recommendations. So what we did with that's really important. So we'll step through each of the modes here, and I won't go into too much detail, but what you'll see on the side kind of with the bullets is what the public said their top recommendations were for each of the categories. So our categories are just standard bicycle recommendations like an on-street bike lane or shared lane markings. In this case, the Broad Street bike lanes from Church North were one of the top priorities for folks. Most people told us that once they got to Church Street, they felt safe on Broad Street. But due to the width of the road north of Church Street, they didn't feel safe riding their bikes to kind of the downtown core. And then you'll see these two over here are paved shoulder projects. These were from our, what I would like to call our courageous bicyclists. These are kind of people who are out in their spandex gear riding their road bike on the more rural routes for a much longer extent. And these were projects that, as DOT does repaving, you can just add that shoulder. It's a pretty low-hanging fruit type project, just to give them a place to get over and out of the main thoroughfare if there needs to be a passing moment. So the sidewalk recommendations in Edenton were a little bit special because, like I said, you guys have a really strongly built out sidewalk network already. So most of these are filling in small gaps. I will say here, Queen Street's going to be a special project. We'll talk about this in a minute. It started in our plan as a sidewalk recommendation, as a carryover from some of the other plans that were done before us. And one of the things that we heard from the community is like, you know, this would be really great. I want to get over to Bennett's Mill Pond, or I want to get over to the fish hatchery. But they wanted it to be a greenway. So we gave them something and they said, we want more. And you'll see here in the priority projects a little bit later on that we reflected that desire and switched that over to be a wider 10-foot path instead of a traditional 5-foot sidewalk. And then our final one is the actual multi-use recommendations. So there's a lot of popularity for the route that follows Pembroke Creek. There's a lot of appetite for that to be something similar to what's with the Neuse River Trail, the Greater Triangle, where it's a paddle trail and a bike trail for large portions of the body of water. There's also this abandoned rail line not too far from where we are now that had a lot of popularity with folks, and we'll talk about that one a little bit more here in a minute. All right, and then I said the intersections. This was a hot topic with a lot of the members of the community. We've got the great grid, but sometimes we forget what happens at our intersection. Sometimes we don't have the striped crosswalks that makes it clear where you go. Sometimes we don't have the pedestrian countdown heads where we might need them. So these were some of the hot button locations for members of the community that we heard kind of over and over as we were going through the process. The final phase of that survey, like I had mentioned, is as we were getting ready to prioritize the projects and really start putting some data behind what would score well at the NCDOT level and make you all the most competitive for funding, is we asked the public what was most important to them. So on this slide, you'll see that the lower the number, the higher the public ranked it. So safety was their #1 priority. You'll see that the public cared least about cost effectiveness, but as engineers we know you can't forget that one. So we did not just completely forget about it as we got into the prioritization process, knowing that the public doesn't always resonate with what benefit cost analysis is when we're trying to decide which projects to put our tax dollars towards. So just a quick overview of the prioritization. I'm going to breeze through these because this is the data part. It's not very fun, and the projects at the end are much more interesting. So accessibility and connectivity, when we got to this one, we really looked at the number of destinations within a quarter mile of the facility. So this was anything from a park to a school, just trying to think about what would connect you to the most folks. Like I said, we didn't get rid of cost effectiveness at the end. Once we got our full score together, we also put together cost estimates for each of the projects and looked at the equivalence of a benefit cost ratio just to see where we might get the most bang for our buck. So that was still an element of it, even though the public was less excited about it. Demand and density, this is really thinking about where the most of our people are. This was using the underlying population data from the census just to see what facilities reached the most people within kind of that general area. And then level of service was a little bit tricky. This is a floofy planner term, doesn't really mean something to the average person, but this is really looking at if this facility is a big 5-lane road like Virginia, the level of service for pedestrians or bike on that's going to be a lot lower than something here in kind of our historic core where you can, feel pretty comfortable walking in the middle of a 2-lane roadway. So the more terrible the road was for bikes and pedestrians, the more scores it got for improving the bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And then finally, the public input. This was actually something that we quantified through what they told us. We asked them to rank it. We wanted to make sure that we used that data. So the rankings that the public provided through the survey and at the in-person event at the farmers market was directly rolled in and put on par with the technical data that was kind of the background of this. And then our last one is safety. This is the one where we had the clearest guidance. NCDOT has a very strict way that they look at safety when they verify projects across the state so that they're getting compared apples to apples. So we used their process to make sure that we were setting you guys up for success with that category. And then you'll see here, the public told us what was important to them. So you'll see that accessibility, connectivity, and safety was the very top. And then we also put public input at 10% of that overall score. So what the public told us accounted for 10% of the project's total score. So now we get to our priority projects. That's a combination of the data itself and the public sentiment. These are in no top 1 through 5 order. It's just kind of the top 5-ish. Broad Street, the bicycle lanes from Church Street to Oakham Street. This one's an interesting one because from my understanding, this project was a thing at one point and then it wasn't a thing. So just, I guess, the appetite to move this forward would be something that would be handled at a council level. And then the other tricky thing about this one, you'll see it's got a pretty price tag there. A lot of that's because after you get north of Virginia, the road necks down quite a bit and you contend with the rail crossing, and that always makes a project skyrocket when you've got to think about widening the road itself. So this is actually a low-cost, kind of low-hanging fruit project. We heard from a lot of people that live along the Oakham Street area that they feel pretty safe, but they would just like to have a place that makes it more visible to the people driving that there's bikes, allowed to be on this road. And the easiest way to do that is to put out the bike sharers, and these are a pretty low-cost treatment, and it'll really allow the bikes. So when the sharer's in the road, that tells the bicyclists where their tires should kind of align so that it allows for safe passing. And it just makes them more visible to the cars so that everyone knows that they're supposed to be there and they have just as much right in the roadway as the vehicles. Church Street, I won't spend too much time on this one. Like I said, you all have a really robust sidewalk network, so most of these sidewalk projects are tiny little gap fills. So you'll see here this section of Church Street sidewalk is just barely over a quarter mile. So just filling in those tiny gaps where we might have them missing, and some of those did rise to the level of being more of a priority. Same thing with Virginia Road. This section of sidewalk is just some very, very minimal gaps on the north side. But with this project, one of the biggest things we heard were about the crossing improvements, particularly right there at the Virginia and Broad intersection, as well as at Granville Street. So going in and putting in the striped crosswalks and maybe trying to add some pedestrian heads so that people know when it is safe to cross at some of those locations. And then Queen Street, I said I would pick on this one a little bit. This started as a sidewalk recommendation in the plans, but based on the public sentiment, we improved it to be a greenway. We're showing it as asphalt. That would be part of something that the town could look at during the design phase to make sure that it aligns with the historic character. You guys would have a lot of different options for the finishes of that surface. Asphalt's definitely the cheapest, but it's not the most attractive if we want to remain the prettiest small town in the South. And it does have a pretty hefty price tag, but with this, there's a lot of options out there for getting it done. With the new bipartisan infrastructure law, there's a lot of grant opportunities out there, and some of our neighbors like Elizabeth City just benefited from those. So those are outlined a little bit in the action plan. And then our final one is the abandoned rail corridor, not too far from where we stand. This is a tiny little section of trail, but it has a lot of opportunity to kind of catalyze downtown. I'm gonna use an example from Wilmington, a little bit bigger jurisdiction, but a lot of the same historic charm as you all. They're actually partnering with NCDOT's rail division right now to re-envision kind of a 3-block section of an abandoned rail corridor and making it an art walk. So that's just going to allow them to have something else to enhance their tourism. It's a tiny section, but it's, people go out and they get dinner or whatever in downtown, and then they can go stroll through the art walk, sit on a bench and admire some stuff there. And we saw this abandoned rail corridor as a great opportunity for that. So finally, our action plan and funding. I've mentioned a couple of the grant opportunities that are out there along the way, but some of those are outlined here a little bit further, as well as some of the partnership opportunities that you all have with NCDOT and with your regional planning organization to further implement these projects. Having the plan in place is great, but if it sits on a shelf and collects dust, it goes nowhere. So you guys will have to put the pressure on Corey and Dwayne to make something happen with it over the next couple of years. But that's really all we have for you, and I'm open to questions.
I've got one. Is it too late to include Hayes in this? I mean, there's nowhere better to bike, and it's gonna be water on both sides. I mean, is it too late? So we're getting, 200 acres that are across that little bridge, and it could also, I don't know,
I think that
that next time.
what we could do is consider modifying the sound side piece to take out some of the sound side, NC 37 or NC 32 kind of high-speed areas. And then maybe the bike ped portion of sound side actually goes along the Queen Anne Creek piece back into town through Hayes along that way. I think that's an option.
And then there's an abandoned railway too, all the way up there. So I just think it'd be a great loop if people wanted to do it. They could just, be on the water in two environments as they go.
I don't have the big maps in front of me, but I think the portion on the abandoned rail line headed up that direction is shown in the plan. I don't know if it quite goes to the extent that you're talking, but I think a segment of that is at least in the multi-use path map.
It was.
Corey, I know the state will be coming in next year to look at Broad Street. Would this be an opportune time to look at bike paths on Broad Street?
I guess the question with DOT would be if we could do something similar to the Oakham style lane share markings. That may be something that we could find out if there's something criteria wise that has to be met in order to just have the marking versus the dedicated lane, because I'm not quite sure, if Oakham is 3 lanes wide and Broad Street from Church up to Virginia is 4, then why couldn't we use that same markings to at least have folks to be aware that they can bike in those outside lanes?
Can you use 3 feet instead of 5 to 8 for bike paths? Is there
The
minimum?
NCDOT minimum is 5.
5.
Yeah.
Well, we had this plan one time, and it was so ugly that nobody wanted it. I mean, we really need to get somebody with some creativity doing it other than, I don't know whether somebody in DOT did it, but whoever did it, it was a complete anchor, drop in the water failure. And so I think that it'd be great to have something we could get excited about. But that thing, it had huge arrows, and it was really, it just didn't. It didn't have, it was gonna have some trees down the middle, it was abysmal failure.
Your recommendation was that the Citizens Committee would continue to meet. Would they monitor this, or would they be in charge of making any additions or the fundraising? What would be their role, and how do you see that being comprised?
So at the end of the day, that would be up to you all, but what we typically see in communities that if they have the bicycle and pedestrian steering committee that's established as a part of a planning process, they would make a formal motion to have that be similar to like our tree commission or our historic preservation commission, and they would be responsible for monitoring the plan. If you guys ever decided to pursue the grant, they could help write the grant narrative. Those grants aren't an easy undertaking. They're usually pretty verbose and 30 to 40 pages long. So they could help with that. The other thing that they can do is help with educational events. So they can partner with the town to do kind of open streets nights. where they could do like a bike rodeo and help fit kids to their bike and give out free helmets or any of those number of things to just add more educational elements around biking and walking in town. And then in some of the smaller communities in western North Carolina, we actually see that the steering committees will put out kind of official bike walk Edenton maps where it would be kind of, these are our favorite paths that you guys would follow, that you could use kind of as a tourism boost as well.
Was that Oakland Street that I was looking at? I saw a water tower and the ballpark. You had 2 bike lanes on one side, and you had traffic going one way. Was that it?
I think what she was saying was you're gonna have a bike designation there so that the lanes will be changed.
Yeah, the lanes
If I
would still
understand it correctly.
stay the same traffic pattern, it would just add the bike facilities to the existing lanes.
So you can still do 2-way traffic that way?
Absolutely.
To allow people to alert drivers that bicycles are using that lane.
Okay.
And that's part of the kind of follow-up from Councilman Miller that I think we should have with DOT is to find out what's the specifics, why is Oakham, would be applicable to the street markings versus Broad Street when we think about from Church up to Oakham. What design criteria is needed for this versus dedicated bike lanes?
Yeah.
And I think a little bit of the trick with that is Church to Virginia is 4 lanes. DOT doesn't typically like to see the shared lane markings on a 4-lane facility. It's a little bit more traffic volume typically. And they prefer them to have a dedicated facility, but it's definitely a conversation that they're typically open to having, if you didn't want to move forward with the full, protected bicycle facility.
And I love the idea of having a dedicated green path, bike path, walking path committee. I think that's great, especially with A's coming on. I think that'd be fantastic. I don't know how we do that, but.
And I think that's something we can look at some of the other larger municipalities that you had mentioned to see if we can't get some
As
structure.
long as those
together.
volunteers keep shaking their head.
I'd like to see all railroad tracks.
I do like
being
those
used
as
in,
well. Yeah.
Create a green space, that would be beautiful.
Absolutely.
Any further questions of Christina? Steve, thank you so very much for a well-prepared presentation. Thank you. All right, the next thing on our agenda is the
Don't leave, Eddie.
Hey, how old as you are?
He's sorry.
is the NCFS Urban and Community Forestry Grant Opportunity. Corey, I'm gonna let you take that, if you will.
Thank you, Mayor. So one of the things that Dwayne has been working on, he's been working with the North Carolina Forestry Service, specifically their Urban and Community Forest Program head, Andrew Planinger. And one of the things that we are focused on is a tree canopy cover assessment. What this would allow is the Forestry Service will use mapping from the past and current aerial photos to try to help determine, in addition to the data that we currently have, that's our GIS data for the trees, if there's any places that need improvement, if there's any places that are overpopulated, or if there are any places that could use a different variety of trees. In addition to gaining that information, this also allows us the ability to work towards securing additional grant fundings. This is very much a gatekeeper for a lot of opportunity through the Forestry Service. This grant is a total of $2,723 of cost associated with the assessment, of which there is a 20% match. Dwayne and I have discussed this with the folks from the Forestry Service. There's also an in-kind piece that we will by far meet the 20% in-kind services with our town employees. And so actually this will be a zero cost item as long as Dwayne and I, as well as the Public Works and the Landscaping Department, can work towards meeting some of the hours towards this, which we shouldn't have a problem at all. Dwayne, is there anything else to add?
Did you see the email today?
I did not.
It actually, the dollar amount changed, the guy, when, pardon me for a second, see if I can bring it up. I got an email, I think, got an email today, the fee is actually, $6,995.03 with a 20% match, which is $1,399.01. This just came out today, actually I haven't been in office all day, but I saw it on my phone this morning, read through it. He made a mistake in his calculations,
What was that, 6,900 what?
$95.03. That's the total with the town's, match of 20% being $1,399.
So with that, there still would be a 20% match. That would leave the town roughly a $1,400 commitment to do this, minus the in-kind services, which I think we will by far meet. That should leave roughly $849 for us to complete this tree canopy survey. We've been working with our local forester on this. We do recommend that the council take action on this tonight and move forward with this. As we said previously, this is very much a gatekeeper for very long list of other opportunities for us to continue to grow and maintain our Tree City USA standards, as well as keeping the Edenton beautiful.
I've got a couple of questions. Just one of them's procedural. Are we still in special meeting and going to be able to vote on this?
Yes.
Okay, that was my procedural question. And then my practical question is, will there be a component of this assessment to identify what I call some tree deserts that we have in town? There's some neighborhoods that are vastly underserved as far as their tree cover, and I'd like to see some priority be given to the assessment
That's one of
in that regard.
Yes, one of the categories that we will identify of any places that is in desperate need of urban trees to be added.
Anyone else have any questions of Corey or Dwayne? If not, I will entertain a motion.
So,
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carried. All right, now we go into our committee meetings, and the first on the agenda is the Administrative Committee, and that is chaired by Councilman Hyde.
Thank you, Mayor Stallings. We have three matters to discuss tonight. The first would be the application fees that we charge for certificates of appropriateness. Dwayne and Corey conducted a study over the last 14 months. The town has encouraged a deficit of almost $90 per month for entertaining certificates of appropriateness. The deficit is largely running due to increases in advertising costs, and I'm going to hand it over to Corey and Dwayne to discuss it more. The way I look at it, we're certainly not attempting to make any money off of certificate of appropriateness fees, but we certainly don't want to run at a deficit of over $90 per month. So Corey and Dwayne have come up with some recommendations as to the amount they feel like we should charge so that we're no longer running at a deficit when we consider requests for these certificates. So Corey or Dwayne, whoever's.
Okay, and thank you, Councilman Hyde, for that. Dwayne has been working very hard on this. If we look back at the previous 14 months on average, not including any administrative fees, office supplies, any staffing costs, just in advertising alone, the advertising for our COAs and for the Preservation Committee meetings is running at a deficit of $87.38 per month. So what we currently have, our major COAs are $25 and our minors are free. What we're recommending is that the cost of the major COA be raised from $25 up to $50, and that would be for residential properties, and that we would see a $100 charge for any commercial properties. In addition to that, what we're requesting is that the minor COAs be raised to $25 from being free. As far as numbers go, Dwayne, on average, major versus minor each month.
We're gonna be looking at it over the past several months since I've been handling. Last month we had 2 applications that went in front of the Preservation Commission. The advertising cost was $157. We got $50 from the fees, which left us $107 basically, not counting any postage, Preservation Commission fees themselves, stuff like that. So that's kind of when I got looking at previous history and stuff. And this is not out of the normal for any other municipality. There's some that are basically the same, but there's some that go all the way up to $1,000 for commercial properties and stuff in places. That's not, I just got looking and saw a trend where if we do charge this and the amount of application we have had in the past, it will kind of meet in the middle and help out with, hopefully have a zero line there instead of a deficit.
And so, what we are recommending tonight is that council, or committee, consider increasing the major COA cost from $25 up to $50 for residential and $100 for commercial, and that the minor COA fee be raised from $0 up to $25. And this should help us to buffer any advertising costs that the town incurs for these
We
changes.
definitely shouldn't be recurring on a deficit on that, so.
And so staff recommends that the committee consider this, discuss it, and consider a vote to send on to full council.
Did anybody have any questions of
Yeah,
staff on that?
Is this just the Preservation Commission, or is this something we face with the Planning Board and the Board of Adjustment? Should we be looking at all of those instead of just one?
Do the other,
The
boards and
fees
commissions
are higher there, and I will look back over the past, I would have looked back over several years to look at if there was any, there probably is a deficit there, just because of advertising and everything. But this was the one that happens every month, so I wanted to go ahead and get on board with this before I started looking at the other boards themselves.
One question. Is this going to prevent anyone from, is it going to be a hardship for anyone based on our experience?
Well, I haven't seen any pushback. Most folks were required to have a building permit to pull this to begin with, so they know that there's some administrative costs that come with any of these improvements. Most of these are usually pretty substantial when we consider COAs from our historic district. So no, I don't think there would be any financial hardship as a result of these changes.
If there are no other questions or comments, Mayor, what I would recommend is we move this to full council for further discussion and a vote at our September regular meeting.
Okay.
Mayor Stallings, the next 2 matters are related, and what I'm going to recommend, we already have a closed session per North Carolina Statute 143-318-11A6 to conduct a performance evaluation of the town manager. And I would recommend that administrative committee items 2 and 3 be moved to the closed session, and then if we have anything to report in open session, we'll do so when we come out. I think probably we're going to have some discussion tonight, and I can't speak for the council as a body, but probably put it in a position to have some sort of formal action taken at the September meeting. But that all depends on how the closed session goes. But I would ask that we amend the agenda. And if you need a motion, I'll put that in the form of a motion to amend the agenda, but to place number 2 and number 3 under the administrative committee agenda on the closed session for later in the meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
And Mayor, with that being done, that concludes our report.
Okay, thank you, sir. And the next is our Public Works Committee, and that's chaired by Councilman Miller.
Mayor, we got two items of business. The first being a driveway permit application. Our Public Works Director, David Myers, is requesting the town to consider designing a driveway apron permit application. In the past, all driveway repairs were addressed by verbal agreement only. With the creation of the driveway permit application, the town will be better able to manage the driveway apron repairs process. Public Works Committee would like to send this on to full council September 13th meeting for a review and vote. The second item,
I have a question about that before you move on. Would this be something that could hopefully avoid situations like you have coming out of PNC Bank and coming out of Wendy's, where it seems like it's a much steeper
yes.
apron than other places, and you end up
Personally-
bottoming out?
That's a good example. Personally, I was involved in the PNC apron, and it was mainly discussion between me, Corey, and David Myers. We did it among ourselves. There was no process to really go through it.
But this would allow us a process.
This would allow us a process.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Mayor, second last item is a leaf truck. Public Works Street Division is requesting the town to purchase a 2022 Extreme vacuum truck at a cost of approximately $185,000. This purchase would replace the current leaf truck, which is past its useful life expectancy. Both Truist Bank and Southern Bank have actually given us financial proposals. Town staff recommends council approve the Truist Bank proposal with a 3.55% interest rate. This interest rate would save the town approximately about $1,100 over a 10-year period. Public Works Committee would like to forward this on to council September 13th meeting.
All right.
And I had just one question and comment on that. Corey, can you and Virginia work on that report? I don't know if it's due yet, but I think it would be good for us to have that debt service report in front of us before we vote at the next meeting, just to show, because I understand that a few things are going to be coming off our plate in the near future.
And we have things going on our plate too.
Yeah.
And
I think we've requested that be done quarterly.
Yes.
Quarterly, she
Yes.
does it quarterly.
And we would have that tonight, but Virginia did add one note here for us to consider, is that, as a reminder, she did include this for the general fund. The LGC recommends debt service payments stay below 15% for the general fund budget, which equates to roughly $987,000. This line would put the total debt for the general fund service up to roughly $528,000, which represents 8%. So we're at almost half of what the LGC would like to see as far as debt service for our general fund. But I'll be glad to provide those for our other two enterprise funds as well. And I should be able to get that for our next meeting.
And also, didn't we adopt a policy that we had stricter guidelines in the LGC?
Yes.
And if you could compare this with what our guidelines are?
Yes, I will. I'll be glad to have that. And I can have that for our September 12th meeting. I'll be glad to present that as new business.
Is that 12th or 13th?
13th.
13th. Mayor, that's all.
Okay.
Public Works.
All right, now we'll go into closed session per NC General Statutes 143-318-11 to conduct performance evaluation of the town manager. So I'll ask if the public will all dismiss yourselves. Councilman High to highlight what we talked about.
Murray, we back on?
Yep.
Okay. Councilman Stallings, agenda item 2 under the administrative committee was discussion of the amended employment contract between the town of Edenton and town manager Corey Gooden. And my recommendation is that we move forward to the full council meeting in September, the consideration of an amended employment contract between the town and its town manager. And I would just put that forward as a recommendation, that we do that.
You need a recommendation, you need a motion.
As chair of the committee, I would move that we send this forward to full council in September for consideration of an amended employment contract. Any second?
Yeah.
You've already done it.
Motion to second,
Okay.
further discussion. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion
And
carried.
Mayor Stallings, the last matter that the administrative committee has is I would move that we consider the approval of the closed session minutes from our August 9th, 2022 closed session, and that we vote on those at the September meeting.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, that concludes our agenda. Unless anybody else has anything to come up?